Welcome everybody to the Legends Lecture, and upon request we are considering the fact that the US Championship is being held in St. Louis, and today's lecture is going to be dedicated for previous participants of the US Championship. And how could we start a lecture about American players without at least giving a mention to Frank Marshall, who was a very sharp and great tactician. Of course, parenthetically I can say that if you're anticipating any Bobby Fischer games, I can show them because I bet everybody else always does. And it's really a hit or miss on the chances of you seeing one or not. This game you might have seen, but I think that most people haven't. For example, I've seen it a long time ago, and when I was researching for this lecture, it was like, oh yeah, there's this game. But I haven't seen it in years, so I'm hoping that you guys either haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while. So he was actually playing a match against Janowski, back as you can see as 1912. And Janowski was actually kicking his butt. And he made up for it with this game, I think. So sometimes you lose the match, but one game just leaves such a good taste in your mouth that it's almost worth losing the match. I think this game was it. So, once again, he is playing the Petrov, and I showed actually another class. I don't know if it was the Legend class, but it was another class where he was again playing the Petrov, and people were wondering, why is he playing the Petrov when he's an aggressive player? Well, I think that this game is going to be an example, but not a lone example. There are actually great attacking chances from the Petrov. White is to be cautious in many lines. So he took here, here, here. So far we are following normal lines that even till today are very playable. Bishop to d3, bishop to d6. And again, remembering that this game was played like 100 years ago, c4. Nowadays we know that c4 is not urgent. Normally both sides castle, then c4 is played, but this is not super tragic. So black castles. Again, white can still transpose by castling. If white would have castled, again, like I always like to say about beautiful games, sometimes one little difference and the game would have been just unknown. This game could have just disappeared. But instead, white decides to try to refute the black strategy. After all, the bishop is hitting the knight, and the pawn is undermining the structure from under. So he decided to take. Bad move. Really bad move. But you wonder why? Well, before we even look for moves, we have to understand that for the cost of a double pawn, that doesn't seem the most impressive thing in the world, black is already castled, and he has two pieces out just like white does, but albeit the knight on e4 is better than the knight on f3, and it's his move. And of course, if you boondoggle here and fall asleep, then white is going to castle, he's going to complete his development. Maybe, God forbid, he's even going to get to protect his extra pawn and make it prove that it's worth something. So now the game really begins. Check. Already at the beginning of an inconvenience. Like sometimes a move like this is just disturbing the piece. Now what? White has several possibilities. In the game he played king to f1 because he concluded that, for example, if knight bd2, bishop f5, already it is becoming a big mess. Notice that there's like a threat with the knight, either like taking on d2 right now, and the bishop on d3 is unprotected. Also, I want to play rook e8 at some moment, or maybe take and rook c8. Needless to say that this is a very, very tricky position for white, very unpleasant. So that was not very appetizing. Alternatively, he could have played bishop to d2, but then after the natural takes, already black has two bishops. Takes, check. Again, white has to do something he really doesn't feel like doing. Either move the bishop back or move his king away. So I guess this, which is as good as any. And then queen e7. Even queen takes d5 is a good choice. Regaining the pawn in life is really good. And of course, queen e7 just tells, you know what, just don't castle. And again, there'll be quick development here, and I'd rather be black any day of the week when white cannot castle. So he decided to play king f1. Of course, a position like this is exactly to Marshall's liking. So in this position, he played queen takes pawn. Not so much for the sake of regaining the pawn, but the queen gets active. And of course, the knight on e4 needed support because the bishop was attacking it. Now white played queen c2. Probably the most logical move. I mean, how else to complete the development? So queen c2 seems to be a pretty decent aggressive move. And rook e8, again, the logical response. why move the knight? You can just defend it with the rook. So in this position, white is not necessarily dying. I mean, he's probably a tiny bit worse. But again, if you put it to a cold-blooded computer who has no emotions and he doesn't have a bad feeling about the fact that he has a king on f1, maybe lagging a little bit in development, he cold-bloodedly just plays the best moves and probably maintains some sort of an equilibrium. However, with a human, it's always very different. So already he makes a very big mistake. As I wrote, I think this is the line that the computer suggested, to play a3, chase the bishop away from the long diagonal, after bishop d6, then bishop e3, and somehow white is regrouping. Next move, his knight is going to come out, either to c3 or d2, and eventually he's going to try to make it so that he can castle by hand. Easier said than done, and that's why, of course, black is to be preferred, but it's certainly not the end of the world. We know who we want to be here, black, but white is still alive. Instead, after this, he decided to play knight c3. Okay, so far pretty understandable. And again, black played what I thought was a forced move. He took, okay, white took back. Yeah, I should say that bishop h7, if you try to interpolate the move bishop here, and king h8, it's going to transpose to the game, basically. It's going to be almost the same as the game. So, after this, he took back. Probably white thought to himself that he is doing pretty okay. He managed to get rid of the menacing center knight that gave him so much trouble. He is attacking the bishop. His center just improved. And not to mention in the offing, he always has bishop takes h7, winning a pawn. But Marshall in these positions was very, very strong. If white was already kind of sitting in his armchair or in his chair comfortably, Marshall just played the move, and I guess the mood has changed. Bam. Queen takes f3. Well, for those of you who look puzzled, I'll quickly explain. He took here. If he would have taken the queen, the game would have ended very quickly after check, and rook takes f1, checkmate. Kind of embarrassing. So, I'm positive that Janowski just completely forgot about queen takes f3. He was probably so busy analyzing all kinds of lines, seeing if he can be safe, and just forgot about something. Well, it's not really trivial, right? So he took on b4. Okay, so very nice. And now I can tell you that the position is so good for black, after the mistake knight c3, that there's more than one way to win. Of course, you can play one move at a time. But I wonder if somebody can tell me what is the best move. Please raising hands because other people. So, anybody? Just one person? Two people? Anybody else? Yeah?
Bishop h3?
Yeah, bishop h3. I'm sure, Julian, you wanted to say the same. Yeah. Bishop h3, that's why I give somebody else the one because I knew you would say right. So bishop h3 indeed is the best move here and very, very strong. And Marshall didn't play it. I'm amazed. Because normally Marshall would be like the last person to miss something like this. You know, it's kind of a position you can't take the queen, the pawn is pinned. If you take the bishop, queen takes h1, mate. And of course he's threatening queen g2 mate. So he would have to play rook g1. Let's take a look at the variation. Oh, actually I don't think I wrote it, so we'll put it in. After here, and then this. Oops, sorry. Here, and this is just a disaster. This is even worse than the game. I mean, the game was bad enough, but this would have been even worse. So, okay, he played knight c6. Okay, in this position, all kinds of threats. Among them, knight takes b4. Still, of course, the queen cannot be taken. So a real fun game to play with black. So in this position, Janowski thought to himself, okay, what can I do? Played bishop b2. Okay, probably the last mistake in the game. It's really hard to advise what to do. I mean, this pawn is hanging, the queen is untouchable, bishop h3, like we said, is in the offing. Everything looks good. Hard to suggest a good move for white here. I don't remember what the computer says is best, but I think it's beyond salvage. So, bishop b2, and he played knight takes b4. Again, in this position, bishop h3, just monster. Rook g8, knight takes b4, check. Otherwise, the queen moves, the bishop just goes. King h8, and no move anymore. There's just no defense. Everything is hanging, and this is just lost. I think the computer said something like +4 for black, or maybe more. So, can do that. He played knight takes b4. Okay, so I have to admit that when you have a move like this that looks so great for black, and it gets a dubious sign, you know that black's position is really, really fantastic. So again, white did bishop h7. If the queen moves, knight takes bishop is very discouraging. So this, king h8, and now he took the queen. Okay, looks like the only move. What else to do? If you move the queen away, again, bishop h3 is strong. Knight d3 is coming, there are tons of good moves. So here, check. Here, knight takes, bishop takes. At first glance, you think to yourself that Marshall just lost his mind, because what the heck, he traded queens when he was attacking, and now he is down a piece, not even for one pawn. But a more careful look shows you that, again, you have to not only count the value of the pieces nominally, but also practically. The king is now trapped in a stalemate situation, he can't move. The rook in the corner is very bad, and those two bishops are like ducks waiting to be hunted. So of course the first move is trivial. Rook to e2. Obvious. The two bishops are attacked. What to do? Needless to say, you can move the bishop, lose the other bishop on b2, and then of course it just makes no sense to play on, because you have no pieces that can do anything. He plays the most practical human move, rook c1. And now I want one of you to tell me, what do you think the best move is here? I must say that I had the game shown with the computer already analyzing in the background, and I was really taken aback by its suggestion. I don't think it's that hidden, but somehow I was really, in the nanosecond that I had to look for a move, I didn't think about it, and then as it registered, I was amazed. I promise you there's more than one winning move. That is for sure. What he played in the game was clearly a winning idea. But what do you think, Ken?
We'll just rook to e8.
That's what he played, and who can complain? It was more than enough to win, I promise you. Because again, with many threats, and it's winning material, it's clearly winning. But I mean, there's something very aesthetic about the computer suggestion. Okay, like I said, in the game, he said this, but look at this win. Rook takes c2, amazing. No queens on the board, you down a piece, and now you sack another exchange. Rook takes, rook e8, threatening rook e1 checkmate. And if the rook tries to save it, or the bishop tries to save it, or rook c1, doesn't matter. Rook e6, and there's no defense against rook g6 mate. So minimalistic, really beautiful. I looked at this position maybe for 10 minutes in my house, because I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen ideas like this. Those of you who may know the game Morphy-Paulsen, also with queen takes bishop f3. It's a game that if you haven't seen it, I'm recommending you to go to your databases and see it at home as well. Beautiful game, and very similar motifs. The king again is kind of trapped with a bishop on h3 and a rook on the third rank. But something like this is like up a rook, no queens, extra tempo, and good luck to you. Checkmate is unavoidable. Really beautiful. Okay, so Marshall played the human move again. Rook a2 e8, threatening rook e1 and rook c2. He tried to play bishop c3. Again, a line that's really worth analyzing, courtesy of the computer, I have to admit. Bishop e4, disconnecting the rooks. Of course, you can take the bishop on b2 and be merry, but again, more brutal is to play f5. Again, there's a bishop to be taken on b2 in an endgame, and black says, nah, not today, let me attack the other bishop. And again, totally losing, because you can't take, the bishop can't move, because rook e1. If you try to save, let's say, one bishop, with the idea that if pawn takes f4, you have disconnected the rooks and you thought, hey, I've succeeded in something. Well, bam. Again, amazing, just really amazing. Now I want to go rook f6, g6. Okay, of course you might wonder, why not rook e6, but then f5. Of course, everything is still winning, but it's just we're looking for the most economical, precise, surgical way to win the game. So rook f8, now I want to go rook f6. So d5, so that the bishop is attacking it. And now rook takes f4, and rook g4 checkmate is coming. You can play f3, but of course you can imagine. Did I continue? No, but let me continue now. After f3, I'm going to go into the windmill. Check. Check. Yes?
Could you just play
Let's take it, maybe. Rook takes f3 with the idea of rook g2 here. Yeah, I'm buying it. Yeah, that's also mate, isn't it? Yeah, okay, mate's all over. Yeah, just fantastic. So, I'm impressed again, but he didn't do it. Okay. He played bishop c3, and I'm sure that everybody now can see, because, well, if the example before impressed you, it's more natural now. He played rook e3. Amazing. Again, notice that you cannot play rook takes c2 because the bishop is defending e1. So he plays here. Just monstrous. By the way, of course, if you're wondering why he didn't play rook c2 here, well, of course, the mate is avoidable, but again, you can play rook e6. So if you wanted to, you could have done this, this, and this. It's like a menu selection. You can choose whatever you want. So, yeah. Okay, again, only one winning move for customer, please. So he did this, and very depressing. Okay, now, he played bishop b4 to continue the fight. Had he taken the rook, then we have another very beautiful windmill where you win. Look how many pieces you're going to win in just like one move, basically. Right now, white is up a rook and a bishop. Okay? Exactly, a rook and a bishop. So, check, king f1. There goes the bishop. And you have to go to e1 or g1. You know, let's pretend that you are pretending to protect your rook for a moment. Now check, here and here. So it's winning 2 rooks and a bishop with one little maneuver. Just, again, no queens on the board. To me, this is just almost like a composition. Very, very beautiful. Okay. So, like I said, he refused the rook. He played here. And now he just played here. Idea, rook f takes f2 and mate. Bishop d1. Impressive, right? He's skewering the rooks. Rook f6. Take my rook. And of course, in this position, Janowski had all he could take. How to stop bishop rook g6 mate. The only way is to try to maybe play here. But then, of course, just rook takes. And game over. Very impressive performance by Marshall. Really, one of Marshall's best games. Everybody might know the game against Levitsky when he played queen g3 and the rumor about the gold coins that showered the board. Of course, that's a beautiful move. But overall, I think with the minimalistic forces that are here, this is really a beautiful example. So, 0-1. Okay, so that's one game. This game is dedicated to my friend Arthur Bisguier, who I haven't seen in many, many years. And we were teaching for many years at the same chess camp. And one time he was holding a book and he was showing me his game against Bent Larsen. I didn't even know he beat Bent Larsen. I know he played all the best grandmasters of the 60s, 70s, 50s. And I know he beat Fischer in a very famous game, and he played him several times. But this game just completely blew me off because Larsen in 1965 was already a very, very strong chess player. Some of you might know that he became one of the top players on the rating list and a world candidate just after that. So here he's playing someone who is low rated. Bisguier was lower rated than him. But watch what happens. Again, swashbuckling style. d4, g6, e4. Okay, very typical. Both players are not super experts on the opening and are willing to experiment with different style. Bisguier by nature is a d4 player, but he is not shying away from a modern defense. Larsen plays everything that ever moved over the board, right? He can play any move that was played, he can play it. Very famous for beating Karpov from the black sides of a Petrov and playing all kinds of weird openings. So here, again, Bisguier is definitely not waiting. Immediately the Vienna structure against the modern peers. d6, knight f3. And of course, after knight f6, if the game would have played knight c3, and then either castles or c5, it would have been a very normal opening. But Bisguier plays bishop d3. Again, with this move order, you can differentiate because the pawn on e4 wasn't attacked early on, so the knight can be delayed from being developed. That could be useful sometimes because in some lines, when a c5 is played, then you always have a c3 in the offing, should you choose to just maintain your center. And now Larsen played the move castles, which is normal. White castled. knight d7. A very committal move in my opinion. I think that Larsen was very kind of throwing caution to the wind. I think that normally you will play something like knight c6 or bishop g4, and we just have a normal kind of piece structure. But instead he does this, and I have to tell you that even a simple chess like, okay, he played e5, but another thing that I mentioned that is to play, like let's say like queen e2, so move like let's say queen e2, with the idea that on c5, what other break would you have to play? Then just d5, and we have a really ugly version of a Benoni for black. Because normally black already played something like e6 and pawn takes or c takes, and now the knight on d7 is really clumsy. When you play e6, I might just take it. And you always have to worry about me playing e5. Black is going to be left with a really funny pawn structure. So that was also positionally right, but in this game, Bisguier was in no mood to play positional chess. He just saw the guy with a target right here on g8. You see the target? Yeah, that's the target. And he hunted it until he got it, and boy did he get it. So it all starts with, with e5. All right, now it was time for black to be a little more alert. He had to understand that in this position he has a very serious mass of pawns and potentially pieces coming after him. And he should have played more aggressively. He played the move knight to e8. I really don't like that. I think that knight d5 is much more challenging. He's kind of actually trying to provoke c4 because knight b4 and creating some disharmony in the white army. That would have been a lot more challenging. I'm assuming Bisguier maybe would have played something like c3 to maintain the structure. And I love white. I'd rather be white than black. Of course, you know, the bishop c8 is weak, and where is this knight going? But that would still not be as passive as knight e8. Okay. Again, Arthur can build any which way he wanted to. He can play many, many logical moves, but he decides to just neglect. Notice that this queen side is not really moving right now, and it's not going to move for the near foreseeable future. He decides to just build an attacking position by playing queen e1. We know the queen is heading diagonally to the king side. And Larsen decides that he's going to play the thematic move. When white goes big center, try to gain space, you got to somehow break it, strike it on the side. c5. Very, very logical. Even the computers approve. And now f5. Now, the computer really doesn't approve of this move. But if I have to give it some sort of a real notation, which the computer doesn't allow, because it doesn't have that notation, I would probably say something like exclamation mark and then 2 question marks. Because it's not really justified objectively. Against a computer, he probably would have paid. But in practicality, this is a very hard move to face and very hard move to punish. So, in the game, he played d takes e5. And more interesting, or at least to understand what happened, if he breaks at the foundation with cd4, then f takes g6, e6 is another line, pawn takes, queen h4, pawn takes, knight g5, knight f6, knight d2. Black is in some danger because, well, white has some annoying ideas of playing here, but bishop f5 can be played in this position. Believe me, there is a difference between this position and the one that you will see in a second. Here, bishop f5, rook takes f5 is very exciting. Again, if I have a 9-hour lecture, we can go over all the intricacies of the position. However, no. So you have to just believe me that after analyzing with the computer, it's a very exciting position. Something kind of similar happens. So he took on e5, and Bisguier very wisely takes on g6. And now, very interesting would have been to play f takes g6. The point is that after here, queen h4 takes this pawn, bishop check, here, knight g5, knight f6. This is in black's favor because, yeah, sure, you can win the exchange any day of the week, but after rook takes, bishop takes, I've gotten 2 center pawns for it, and there is no mating attack. And again, look at those guys, the spectators on the left. So, okay, very well. So after takes, he takes with the h pawn. So again, having given 1 pawn on e5, Bisguier is in no mood to regain it. He just wants to continue the initiative. And now Larsen has to take on d4. There's no other choice. Okay, I don't want to get too complicated with the analysis. I can tell you that e takes d4 and c takes d4 are very similar. He took, and now Bisguier played the second best move. He played again one of the principal moves in the position. He wants to soften up the black defense. This bishop is very annoying, especially with those 2 pawns. It's a fortress. So he played bishop to h6. But I can tell you that after knight g5, knight f6, what else? Knight d2, and coming to e4, and this is a disaster. Now after bishop f5, rook takes f5, is just, watch it, takes, I think I stopped around here, but already there is no defense. I mean, I'm just coming here with my knight. If you attack my bishop with e6, I have check on h7, king h8, knight e4. Again, if you put it in the computers, you can see that white is just much, much better. And when you're down material and the computer says you're much, much better, it basically means you're winning. Okay. The game didn't fare much better for Larsen, but because he made a mistake. After ed4, bishop h6, he played the very bad move, knight e to f6. Again, it's like many times we have to choose which rook to bring to the open file. Here it was which knight should we bring to f6 to defend the poor king from his troubles, and he chose the wrong knight. Much better would have been to have played knight d here, and after knight g5, queen d7, and the idea is to play queen g4, already forcing white to make some time-losing concessions, and black can survive. Again, courtesy of the computer. So, let's see what happened after he made the mistake. He played here, knight g5, and you can already tell that black is in deep trouble. White has a classical attacking stance against the dragon, King's Indian type of bishop position, and this is already very, very bad news. So, in the game, he played knight e5, and that really compounds his problems. But I gave one example that was suggested, b5, just to show you how bad the situation is for black. After b5, that looks like some chances on the queen side, right? Trying to shift the attention from the king side. White just played the monstrous bishop takes g6 with a very simple idea. Okay, bishop e7, of course, if you take on g6, I just take here. If you try to take back, then bye-bye queen. Yes, definitely a big O. And yes. And otherwise, after bishop b7, bishop h7, knight d2, the attack just plays itself. Black cannot move any piece, basically. Knight f6 can't move, bishop g7 can't move, you can move the rook, so what? And the king is not exactly where he wants to be. So very, very impressive. Like I said, in the game, he played knight e5, hoping that, maybe he can just get rid of this very, very annoying bishop. And again, a very bad day, bad hair day for Larsen, who just completely missed the following. I'm sure some of you can already see it. Anybody want to take a guess of what was played in this position? Julian? If bishop g7, king takes g7, rook takes f6, king takes f6. Not a pretty picture, I agree, but the game might go on. But there's a shortcut. I mean, maybe if it's winning, yes?
Rook takes f6?
Rook takes f6. Game over. All of a sudden, it's move 14 and Larsen can resign. Let's analyze why. He couldn't take back the rook. That's already a sad statement. Now, why? After e takes f6, of course, very simple, bishop g7. And now you have a choice of which mate you want to get. If you take the knight, then it's on h8. If you take the bishop, then it's on h7. White is very unpicky here. So that was out. He, of course, could have also taken with the bishop. And then white would have played the very aesthetic bishop g7 with exactly the same idea. However you take, you get mated. If king takes, it's mate. If bishop takes, it's mate. Otherwise, I'm threatening queen h. If you take the knight, then queen h8 is mate. Again, mating galore. All right, so what to do? Larsen could have resigned with a clear conscience, but I guess it's kind of embarrassing to resign against someone higher rated than you when you're top grandmaster in 14 moves. So he decided to play on. He played bishop h8, giving Bisguier at least a chance to go wrong. Because you might say, wait a minute, didn't I just take a knight? How about if I keep hunting? How about if I play bishop takes the rook on f8? But he just retreated. If you take on f8, then after this, Okay, again, I think I want to be white rather than black, but this is already becoming messy. Like I always tell my students, when they have a winning position and they start getting funny, I say, here you already have to think. In the other position, you don't have to think. So, of course, no go. Rook F1. Rook E8, trying to save his rook. Bishop F8. All right. Just because the square is empty doesn't mean we can't release the bishop. Of course, it's a clearance sacrifice. I'm dying to get my queen into business here, and the bishop is really in my way, so he just went here. Of course, the idea is very simple. If the rook retreats, then he takes away the king escape square, and queen h7 is checkmate. If the king takes, then queen takes bishop is checkmate. What's worse, I'm threatening queen h7 and queen h8 mate anyways. So Larsen played the move bishop f6, hoping that now the bishop on f8 is ampri. And Bisguier told him, wait a minute, didn't you get my message from before? Second time, same square. Really very, very aesthetic. Can you imagine playing Larsen at the almost when he was close to the peak of his career, and twice you sacrifice a rook on f6, and twice you are doomed? Once again, he could have resigned right here and saved himself 1.5 more moves of suffering. But I guess he decided to oblige Bisguier. He took, and now Bisguier played the last move, yes? Yes, queen h6, again a very aesthetic move. Simply threatening queen g7 mate. And Larsen, again, I guess by now I think he probably played his next move with a smile, realizing that he really got beat. He played here, and that was the point, queen h7 mate. Not every day you get to mate Bent Larsen in 19 moves. Very, very impressive. Never moved. Yeah, I mean, this is, I'll never show this game to my beginner students, because how am I going to explain rook a1 and knight b1? I'll never live to hear the end of it. So, yeah, a very impressive game by Bisguier. Hope you enjoyed it. And as a dessert, we'll see a game by Walter Browne against Christiansen, something slightly more modern. If you can call 1977 modern, still a pretty old game. And Walter had many, many good games where he sacrificed many, many pieces, even though he's a positional player. But especially in his younger days, he was also not afraid of sacrificing. Even in d4 openings, you can get into very aggressive position where you can mate your opponent. So d4, e6, okay, c4, b6. Larry was trying to be, I guess, as tricky as possible, because at that time, I can tell you, in 1977, Walter Browne was just an encyclopedia of theory. He really, really knew his stuff. And he was, the funny thing is that he was playing almost the same lines, both as white and black, so it was supposedly easy to prepare against him. But when you know so much and you have so much experience, sure, he paid the price here and there, but it was a very risky thing to do. So Larry is trying to mix up things, and Walter immediately deviates. This move is not new, even then it wasn't the first time it was used, but the normal line is to play like e4, bishop b7, bishop d3 is a very famous line. Sometimes they even play the move a3, saying, hey, I'm about to build a really strong center, so why should I suffer with knight c3, bishop b4? Okay, Walter goes straight ahead. Bishop a6, again, like I wrote, not my favorite move. I really think that knight f6 is slightly more accurate, you know, kind of controlling. Otherwise, well, in the game you see what happened. White gets to play e4 undisturbed. Why allow that? He took, takes. Of course, c takes is not that great because bishop takes f1. Knight to f6, knight to c3. Again, Walter is just playing very directly. I think that many players would have preferred to play bishop d3 so as to not allow the bishop to pin the knight. Maybe then black would have played bishop before check. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference. So, knight c3, bishop to b4, queen e2 check. So Walter is trying to win an endgame, I guess, because he has a little more space. After queen e7, it would have been unavoidable. But again, Larry Christiansen, a very aggressive player by his own right, is trying to not trade queens, doesn't want to go into a slightly inferior ending, and he brings the bishop back. He justifies the retreat of the bishop with the fact that the queen is blocking the pieces, so we'll have to spend the tempo. As a matter of fact, it's paying the tempo right now. Queen c2, c6, bishop d3, oops, sorry, bishop to d3, b5. Okay, now that is too much. I know that Larry is a very active player. He really cannot stand being slightly behind in space and development, but this, I think, is really asking for it. You cannot have less space, worse development. I mean, when I say worse development, I mean worst active development, where your pieces are more passively placed and get away with a strike immediately before you're ready. So first Walter takes, attacks the bishop. Pawn takes, very, very nicely. Thinking, well, if white takes on b5, then the pawn on d5 is going to go. Of course, Walter has none of it. He plays knight e2. By the way, very interesting would have been to play knight f3, with the idea after this to play here. Again, it's a pawn sack, but with a lot of initiative. If you try to show it to your computer, he shows you ample compensation if black even dares playing knight takes d5 here. Okay, so he played knight e2, b4. He wants his pound of flesh, he wants his pawn. Walter says no problem, and he took. So we can see that Larry is really playing a very provocative game. He's sacking, he takes the sacrifice pawn, saying, hey, I believe I can consolidate, I'm not far away from castling, and therefore, why shouldn't I just take the pawn and enjoy it? All right, so Walter castles, Larry castles. Some of you might say, wait a minute, didn't black just win a pawn? Answer, no. Watch what happened. You'll see. Rook to d1. Of course, there's an isolated backward pawn on the d file, and why shouldn't we just put a rook right behind it? Very logical. Queen a5, the most aggressive response. Knight g3, very, very good move. You can see that white is definitely having something to show for the pawn. The fact that black has, if you just count the material, and you just say, oh, black has an extra pawn on d7, he must be winning. No, he's not winning because the pawn is not queening or anything. But on the other hand, white doesn't have enough initiative to really win the game. It's not like, oh, the attack is just unstoppable. Walter will do his best to play, but Larry had to help a little bit. So, g6. This is the beginning of a very bad idea. He should have just bitten the bullet and allowed the knight to come to f5, continue his development, and again, it'll be a lot of proof on white that he can do something. After g6, the weakness is starting to tell. Step 1, bishop h6, a freebie. Not only the bishop is developed to the most promising and aggressive spot, but at the same time tempo over the rook. Rook to e8, queen d2. Again, he is sensing that the dark squares are going to be good news. And now, he is proven right. The best variation would have been to play takes, knight c7, move the knight away, here, here. Okay, somehow black is semi-consolidating. After knight d6, again, white has a great game, but, and of course probably you have to give up the bishop, but still black, the burden of proof is on white, no question about it. Instead, after this move, he played knight f6. In itself, a logical move. The knight on d5 is very vulnerable, and the knight on e4 is a better piece, and he says, okay, then maybe we should just trade knights. Well, not exactly. Queen f4. Already we can see that there's the beginning of an amassment of pieces around the black king. The bishop, the queen, the two knights, and the bishop, they're all kind of going here. Browne is starting to develop a nice attack. So here Larry must have thought, okay, it's time to reduce the material a little bit, because if not, those pieces are going to get me. So he played, oh sorry, first he played queen b6. Well, the lines behind the scenes are also very, very beautiful. Let's see some lines. Let's, for example, see queen d8, bishop a6, here, knight f6, here, rook takes d7, hi, a visitor, and now, of course, a complete disaster. Black is just collapsing. If queen takes d7, queen takes f6, it's just the end of the game. So, okay, let's see something other variation after queen f4. If you would have played bishop d3 here, knight f6, king h8, of course you cannot take, knight takes e8, and queen takes f7. I mean, black is just collapsing. What else could have been played? Knight h5, knight takes h5, queen takes h5, g4, and the poor queen is embarrassed. After queen here, bishop takes, rook d7, threatening rook takes e7, and the bishop can't move because queen f7, what can I tell you? A disastrous position for black, just complete collapse. So he tried to play queen b6. And here Browne could have, what he played bishop a6 is also not too bad. But look at this variation that the computer suggested. Here, with the obvious threat of knight takes f6 and the bishop on e7 is pinned. So takes, bishop takes, tickling the rook in the corner. Knight c6, bishop d5. And again, an example just to wait and look for a moment of how bad the position is. Everything is unpre. f7 with mate, the rook can't come to f8, not only because the bishop is attacking it, but I'm also attacking this and this. Everything is groggy. The queen, look at how the board is divided. The queen, the bishop, and the knight are all here, completely over. So, after queen b6, white played bishop takes, knight takes, and again, Browne played a move for the crowd, rook d6. What a beautiful disturbance. Of course, he was attacking this knight twice. He really wants to get his queen to f6 because then g7 will be defensible. And what to do? Now I'm basically forking the queen and the knight. Now the knight is attacked 3 times and is defended only once. If the queen just moves, I'll take the knight. So, reluctantly, Larry had to take. Knight takes f6. Of course, queen takes f6, bishop f8. And there's no mate. So he took king h8. For a moment we say, okay, the black king is not a pretty picture, but between saying that and winning the game, there's still a very big mountain to cross, and he played bishop g7 check. I have to say that knight h5 would also work in this position, also a winning move according to the computer, but this was also very nice. Bishop g7, you gotta take, knight h5 check, another beautiful sacrifice. And he took, if he would have played here, because king h8, queen h6 is not very fun, still knight h7. If king e7, queen f6 is checkmate. So here, then check, check, check. Looks very gruesome. The queen on b6 is gone and terrible. So, if we go back after bishop g7 check, takes, and takes, check, and of course, if queen f8, knight takes d7 is not only a royal fork, but also checkmate. So he had to go to the corner. Queen h6. Who would have thought that that was once an innocent d4 opening, right? With a positional structure. So, bishop takes h2, king h1. You could also take on h2, it's not so bad, but this is even funner. Queen takes f6, what else? How else to stop mate? There is no way. So he took, here, queen g5 check, here, queen f6 check. Always repeat, according to my good friend Ben Feingold. And then he just took the bishop. Not only is white up material, but the position, the black position, if you look at the pawn structure, it looks like something that got punched by Mike Tyson, right? It's like, really looks broken up completely. Rook e6, the rest is really just simple technique. We'll show it for history's sake. Rook d1, picking on one pawn. Okay, so we move the queen, picking on another pawn. You're not gonna get my g pawn. Yep. All the pawns are falling like Pac-Man. Tickling the knight, and in this position Larry had all he could take. After the knight moves, he's gonna be lost, right? I mean, I don't know, can you even save the knight? Maybe you can go knight a4, but after rook takes f6 at a minimum, the position is extremely discouraging to play. So Larry threw in the towel. A very beautiful attacking game by Browne, not his only one. All right, guys, we are done. Thank you very much for attending my lecture. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you next time. Thank you. You knew exactly when to enter.
Can you repeat after you said, and now we begin?
Exactly.